Imagine this. You're lying down, cozy under your blanket, scrolling through YouTube for something relaxing, and you stumble upon this video with the title about a prehistoric tribe that stuffed their dead with stones before burning them. Naturally, your first thought is, wait, what? Did I just click on ancient horror or a bedtime story? Don't worry, you're in the right place. This isn't a true crime podcast about cavemen. This is your bedtime lullaby, brought to you by people who've had 150,000 years to figure out weird funeral arrangements. Because apparently, our ancestors had a flair for the dramatic. They didn't just say goodbye. They said, quick, grab the rocks. Grandma's going on her final camping trip. Now, before you start picturing zombie Neanderthals weighed down with boulders, relax. This was ritual, not monster prevention. At least, that's what archaeologists think. Because honestly, when you're digging up bones older than your landlord's sense of humor, there's a lot of guesswork involved. Tonight, we're going to explore this strange practice. Why stones? Why fire? Why gather as a group in caves that smelled like both grief and mammoth stew? We'll walk step by step through life in the Middle Paleolithic. What people ate, how they laughed, what kept them up at night, and, most mysteriously, how they treated the ones who didn't make it. So, get comfortable, snuggle down, let your mind drift back 150,000 years. And if you find yourself chuckling in the dark at the absurdity of stone-stuffed funerals, well, that's just history doing its job. Now, let's begin. Close your eyes and let your mind drift backward. Not decades, not centuries, not even a few thousand years, but 150,000 years, when the Earth looked both familiar and completely alien at the same time. The air is colder than what you're used to, sharp but clean, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and wood smoke, even though the tribe hasn't yet sparked tonight's fire. The sun is just beginning to set, casting long blue shadows across the rugged landscape. Hills roll into valleys, valleys stretch into plains, and in the distance, jagged mountains rise, their peaks capped with snow that refuses to melt, even in the height of summer. You can hear the faint trickle of a stream winding its way down from those mountains, fed by melting ice that is far older than anyone alive. It is a lifeline, this stream, both for the animals that come to drink and the humans who rely on those animals for food, for clothing, and occasionally for some truly questionable decoration. Imagine a necklace made of snail shells, except the snails were the size of your palm and probably tasted like despair when boiled. Nearby, tucked into the side of a limestone cliff, sits the tribe's home, a cave that has been worn by thousands of years of wind and rain into something both sheltering and ominous. From the outside, it looks like a dark mouth, yawning open, waiting to swallow whoever steps too close. But step inside, and it transforms. The entrance narrows quickly, shielding the interior from the worst of the wind. Inside, the walls are cool and damp, the ceiling dotted with soot stains from countless fires, and the ground littered with the smoothed-down debris of 100 generations broken flint, crushed bones, half-finished tools that someone gave up on halfway through, muttering something that probably translated to, "Forget this, I'll try again tomorrow." The mood inside the cave is quiet, but not empty. This is not a silent people. Even now, as the sun sets, you can hear low hums of conversation. Murmurs and chuckles ripple from one corner to another as the day winds down. The sound of stone tapping against stone echoes faintly, the familiar rhythm of someone preparing a cutting edge for tomorrow's hunt. And layered over it all is the distant cry of an animal outside. Maybe a deer, maybe something larger and toothier, the kind of thing you hope doesn't decide to follow the scent of roasting meat into your nice, cozy cave. The landscape outside is equally alive. Herds of animals move across the plains, shaggy and slow, their breath steaming in the chill evening air. Woolly rhinoceroses graze with surprising grace, while mammoths plod steadily, enormous shadows on the horizon. Smaller animals scurry and dart the rabbit-like creatures that will end up as someone's dinner tomorrow, and the foxes that always seem to show up just when you've left scraps unattended. The world is dangerous, yes, but it's also abundant. You can almost feel how full of life it is, how precarious, and yet how rich. The sky above is something modern humans rarely see, an unbroken dome of stars, stretching endlessly, each one bright enough to make you wonder if perhaps your ancestors invented storytelling, not around a fire, but while staring up at this overwhelming ceiling of light. Without street lamps or city glow, the stars are so clear, you could almost imagine reaching out and plucking one, tucking it into your fur cloak like an accessory, a prehistoric brooch. Yes, you say, smugly to your neighbor. This star really brings out the mammoth bloodstains in my outfit. But for all its dangers and vastness, this world is home. The cave feels like safety. Its echoes are familiar, its walls carved with small scratches that may or may not be the beginnings of art. The floor is packed earth, smooth in some places from generations of feet. There's a faint smell of smoke baked into the walls, mingled with the tang of animal hides drying on racks. There's a fire pit in the center, ringed with blackened stones that have seen more meals than anyone can count. The tribe's belongings, if you can call them, that are scattered in little clusters. Flint cores waiting to be struck into tools. Bundles of herbs drying, their purpose part medicine, part seasoning, part maybe this will stop Grok from sneezing all night. Bones cracked open for marrow. Piles of skins folded carefully to serve as bedding. The mood of daily life here isn't one of despair or constant fear, though the environment could easily justify that. It's one of resilience, of rhythms. The people wake with the light, they forage and hunt, they patch their clothing, they share food, they squabble, they laugh. They aren't thinking about the grand sweep of prehistory. They're thinking about whether the fire will last through the night, whether the water skins are full, whether the dried meat hidden in the back of the cave will survive until spring. And as night fully settles, the tribe gathers. The fire glows, orange, shadows dancing up the walls like ancient puppets. The warmth pushes back the chill that seeps into your bones if you linger too far from the flames. They sit close together, shoulder to shoulder, the comfort of shared body heat just as important as the comfort of shared stories. Someone hums softly, a melody so simple it's more like a vibration than a song. Children drift towards sleep, heads lolling onto their mother's laps. And for a moment, it feels timeless, as though nothing has changed in all the years since. Because in truth, much hasn't. We still gather around artificial fires, our televisions, our phones, our glowing screens. We still crave warmth and story before sleep. We are still, in some strange way, in that cave. Now that the scene is set, let's step closer. Let's meet them not as faceless shadows in a cave, but as people. They don't have names in the way we do, but for the sake of the story, we'll give them nicknames. After all, it's easier to remember that Twig Collector stubbed his toe yesterday than to keep track of yet another Homo sapiens idaltu. The tribe numbers may be 25 souls, give or take a baby or two, depending on the week. That's about the size of a small classroom, or half the number of people who mysteriously appear in a coffee shop the moment you're about to get your drink order. Each member has a role. Not official, not written down on parchment because parchment won't exist for many, many millennia, but understood. There's the skilled flint napper, whose hands are always covered in tiny cuts, the sort of person who could take a rock and somehow transform it into a spearhead sharp enough to shave with. Not that shaving is on anyone's to-do list, unless you count scraping off frost. There's the gatherer who knows which roots to dig up, which berries won't kill you, and which mushrooms definitely will. You can almost hear the dry tone in her voice. Yes, of course you can eat that one. If you've always dreamed of a 3-day hallucination where you believe you're a mammoth. There are the hunters, broad-shouldered, but not invincible. Their days are spent trailing animals across the plain, hoping for a kill, sometimes returning triumphant, sometimes returning with nothing but frost in their hair, and stories about how the mammoth definitely saw us first. The children are learning constantly, not in classrooms, but by watching every move, copying the way tools are shaped, imitating the way adults walk quietly through the brush. Their games are practice, pretending to throw spears, sneaking up on each other, learning the difference between a rabbit track and a wolf track. The way modern kids learn the difference between a car logo and a fast food sign. And there are the elders, wrinkled, slower, but carrying inside them the memory of winters past. They've seen hunger years, wet years, years when the cave floor flooded, years when rival groups stole their food. Their wisdom isn't abstract philosophy. It's practical. Don't camp near that ridge, it floods. Don't hunt the big bull mammoth alone, unless you want your name to be a cautionary tale. They may not live as long as we do, but their presence shapes the rhythm of the group. Their tools are humble by modern standards, but miraculous in their world. Flint knives with edges sharper than steel when freshly struck. Wooden spears hardened in fire until the tips are strong enough to pierce hide. Scrapers made from bone, used to prepare skins that become clothing. Each tool has a story: who made it, who used it, sometimes who broke it, and had to listen to a very pointed lecture about respecting the flint. Quirky habits? Oh, they have them. The same way every modern family has its rituals and running jokes, so too does this tribe. Someone is always humming. Someone insists on stacking firewood in a very particular order, as though the fate of the hunt depends on whether the sticks lean to the left or right. Someone, probably a child, is constantly hiding other people's tools, which is funny until you're trying to skin an antelope and realize your scraper is under a pile of mammoth dung. Their humor is earthy, but it's there. You can almost hear the laughter echo in the cave when someone slips on wet stone, or when two hunters try to explain why their spear missed the rabbit by what looks like several miles. In those moments, they aren't so different from us. They laugh, they bicker, they tease. Their lives are harder, shorter, but also filled with warmth and absurdity. They aren't just surviving, they're living, eating around the fire, sharing stories, carving small marks into bones that might mean nothing or might mean everything. We can't know. But what we do know is that they were human in the most essential way. Curious, resourceful, stubborn, and sometimes hilariously clumsy. And when you picture them sitting together in the flickering firelight, you realize something soothing. They are both impossibly distant from us, and impossibly close. Every morning in the Stone Age began with the same question: what's for breakfast? And the answer was usually disappointing. No hot cappuccino, no toast with jam, no scrambled eggs, unless you happened to find a bird's nest and could run faster than the angry mother bird. Most days, it was scraps from yesterday's hunt, maybe some dried roots, or, if fortune smiled, a small piece of meat roasted the night before. Imagine waking up to a breakfast menu that basically read, Option 1, marrow bones. Option 2, slightly moldy tuber. Option 3, please check again in 3 days. Food gathering was the full-time obsession of the tribe. And though we tend to picture it as this noble, heroic activity, mighty hunters stalking mammoths, fearless women plucking berries, it was often chaotic and more than a little comical. Take mammoth hunting, for example. On cave walls, it looks glorious. Stick figures with spears, mammoths falling dramatically. In reality, it was less epic kill and more slapstick chase scene. A mammoth, after all, weighed up to 6 tons. That's like trying to chase down a bus with a pointy stick and the vague hope that the bus might trip over its own feet. You can imagine the tribe creeping through the tall grass, whispering strategies. One hunter, always overconfident, saying, "We'll surround it quietly," and then, boom. And then the mammoth sniffing the air, spotting them instantly, and taking off in the opposite direction, like a hairy freight train. Cue the hunters sprinting, spears flailing. One of them, inevitably tripping over a rock and landing, face first, in the mud. The chase would end with everyone panting, the mammoth long gone, and somebody muttering, "Well, at least we got some exercise." And it wasn't just mammoths. Even smaller animals could outwit them. Deer were fast, rabbits were faster, and birds had this really annoying habit of flying. Many a hungry night was spent glaring up at a flock of geese, disappearing into the sky, the tribe muttering collectively, "Yeah, sure, rub it in." But when they did succeed, it was cause for celebration. Imagine dragging a freshly killed antelope back to the cave, cheers erupt, fires blaze higher, and everyone suddenly becomes an expert in butchering, even the ones who had spent the chase hiding behind a tree. Meat meant survival. It meant warmth, protein, and a break from gnawing on roots. But it also meant work. Bones had to be cracked for marrow, hides scraped clean, fat preserved. And if you think doing the dishes after dinner is a pain, imagine scraping sinew off bones with a sharp rock while your fingers are already frozen stiff. Gathering food was no less frustrating. Women and older children spent hours combing the landscape for edible plants. The problem was that prehistoric plants weren't very cooperative. Some roots looked delicious but were poisonous. Some berries looked poisonous but were edible. It was like a constant round of nature's worst game show. Eat this or die. One gatherer would triumphantly return with a bundle of something that looked promising, only to have the elder shake her head and say, "No, not that one. Remember what happened to Uncle Tarek." Nobody wanted to repeat Uncle Tarek's 3-day hallucination that ended with him trying to wrestle a tree, and yet, somehow, they made it work. They learned which plants grew in which season, which could be stored, and which had to be eaten quickly. They roasted tubers until they were soft, dried berries to last through winter, and cracked nuts open with rocks, only to curse when the nuts turned out to be empty. It wasn't glamorous, but it was survival. And often, survival was ridiculous. Then there was fishing. Without nets or hooks, fishing involved a lot of splashing, shouting, and trying to grab slippery creatures with bare hands. If you've ever tried to catch a bar of soap in the shower, you can sympathize. Picture a grown hunter, crouched by a stream, hands poised, eyes locked on a flashing fish, then lunging forward and coming up with nothing but water up his nose. By evening, the tribe might return proudly with 3 fish, which, after all that effort, would feed approximately 1 small child. Even so, the frustrations brought laughter. When food was scarce, jokes were even more necessary. Someone would poke fun at the hunter who missed a rabbit by 10 feet, or the gatherer who spent an entire day digging only to return with a fistful of weeds. Humor lightened the burden, turned failure into story, and reminded everyone that while the world was harsh, there was still room for laughter. Daily life in the Stone Age was a mix of desperation and comedy. Food was always at the center, and the chase for it was filled with mishaps. And when you're lying in bed now, well-fed and warm, you can close your eyes and almost hear them laughing at their own mistakes, sitting by the fire with empty bellies, but full hearts, because sometimes laughter was the only feast they could afford. If survival in the Stone Age was a comedy of errors, it was also a drama of togetherness. No one could face the cold, the hunger, and the dangers of predators alone. The cave was more than just stone walls. It was the container of a fragile little society, and within it, community bonds were everything. They huddled together against the cold. In winter, when the air outside was sharp enough to cut, they slept close, piled in layers like human nesting dolls. Children nestled between parents, elders wrapped in furs. Everyone pressed close enough to feel each other's breath. It wasn't just practical, it was comforting. Imagine the warmth of many bodies gathered, the steady rhythm of breathing lulling you to sleep, the sense that you weren't alone in the dark. For them, warmth was survival, and closeness was safety. Food, when found, was shared, not because they were selfless saints, but because hoarding wasn't practical. If one family tried to eat alone, they'd starve the next time fortune turned. Sharing meant reciprocity. Today you eat from my kill. Tomorrow, I eat from yours. It was the unwritten law of the cave, and around the fire, portions were distributed with care. The elders got the choicest marrow, the children tender bites of meat, the hunters gnawed the tougher cuts. Everyone knew their place, and everyone mattered. Tasks, too, were shared. Someone tended the fire, someone watched the children, someone knapped flint, someone wove plant fibers into rope. They moved like a single organism, each part doing its work, each dependent on the rest. If the fire died while the hunters were gone, the cave would freeze. If the gatherers failed, no one had berries to balance the meat. The system was fragile, but together it held. Even danger was faced as one. When predators prowled wolves, lions, even the occasional curious cave bear, the tribe's strength lay in numbers. Alone, a human was weak, slow, and poorly armed. But together, with spears raised, voices shouting, they became something formidable. Strength came not from muscle, but from cooperation. But the bonds weren't just practical, they were emotional. You can imagine them telling stories around the fire, stories that explained the stars, the animals, the mysteries of life and death. A child listening wide-eyed, an elder's voice rumbling like distant thunder, and laughter breaking the solemnity when someone mimicked a mammoth sneeze. In those moments, community wasn't just survival, it was joy. Quarrels, of course, happened. Even in the Stone Age, someone probably snored too loudly, or stole an extra portion of meat, or left tools scattered. But disputes were short-lived. They couldn't afford grudges. Life was too precarious to waste on feuds. Reconciliation came quickly, with laughter or the quiet pressure of necessity. It's soothing to imagine them there, pressed together in firelight, their faces flickering orange and gold, their bonds holding them steady through endless winters. The cave wasn't just a shelter from the cold. It was a shelter built from love, necessity, and the knowledge that only together could they endure. And as you drift towards sleep, you carry that same truth. Even across 150,000 years, the bond of humans gathering together hasn't changed. We are still creatures of community, still warmed by each other's presence, still kept alive by the fragile, beautiful web of togetherness. When you imagine life 150,000 years ago, it's easy to assume it was all grim determination, endless hunger, and frostbitten toes. But that picture leaves something out: humor. Because even without Wi-Fi, without cat videos, without memes about forgetting your password for the 14th time, they still laughed. They had to. Without laughter, the long nights would have been unbearable. Picture them gathered around the fire, bellies just barely full enough to ease the ache, cloaks pulled tight against the drafts that slithered into the cave. The flames flicker across their faces, carving shadows into the walls. And then, someone slips while tossing a stick into the fire. Not just a small stumble, but a full-on flail, arms windmilling, feet sliding out from under them. The stick goes flying, lands harmlessly in the ashes, but the cave erupts in laughter. Even the elders chuckle, their breath puffing out in small clouds. Humor was not optional. It was survival, of a different kind. Without Netflix, entertainment came in simpler packages. Stories were king. They told tales of the hunt, often exaggerated. The rabbit that was as fast as the wind, the deer that vanished into the air, the mammoth that looked at me and knew fear, though if mammoths truly knew fear, they were hiding it very well. Hunters puffed out their chests as they acted out their exploits, pantomiming with stone spears, grunting, squealing, sometimes collapsing into giggles when their impersonation of an antelope looked more like a confused goat. Children played shadow games. With nothing but firelight in their hands, they could create crude shapes against the walls. You've probably made a dog or a bird with your hands in front of a lamp. So did they. Except theirs probably looked like big scary predator or funny-looking human with too big nose. And then came the giggles, because even 150,000 years ago, kids knew the joy of making adults laugh with something silly. Music was another form of comedy. No guitars, no drums, just rhythm, hands clapping, sticks beating against stone, maybe a flute carved from a bird bone. The sound was raw, but it carried a rhythm that got heads nodding, feet tapping. And once rhythm entered the cave, dancing followed. Now imagine dancing in heavy animal hides, with zero choreography, in a space barely bigger than your living room. It wasn't graceful ballet. It was prehistoric slapstick, someone tripping over a fur, someone bumping their head on the low ceiling, someone spinning too quickly and knocking into the fire pit, followed by frantic stomping as sparks flew. It was chaotic, but it was joyous. And then there were pranks. Every society invents them. Maybe one child tucked a rock into someone's sleeping furs, so they rolled over in the night onto something painfully pointy. Maybe someone hid another's scraper just before they needed it. Nothing malicious, just enough to lighten the mood. And when the prank was revealed, laughter filled the cave, the irritation melted by the absurdity of life itself. Even language rudimentary, though it was held humor, a grunt, a whistle, a mimicry of an elder's stern expression. Picture a child copying the exact frown of the group leader, puffing out his cheeks, crossing his arms, then dissolving into giggles when everyone else noticed. Those were the memes of their day. Small, silly, but endlessly repeatable. Because without those moments, the cave would have been unbearably heavy. Outside was cold, dark, dangerous. Inside had to be warm, light, and occasionally ridiculous. Their laughter echoed against stone walls, not because they had much to laugh at, but because they couldn't afford not to. And in that way, they're not so different from us. You laugh at a video of someone tripping on a sidewalk. They laughed when someone tripped on a rock. You laugh when someone tells an over-the-top fishing story. They laughed when someone claimed to have wrestled a deer. Humor has always been our secret fire, the thing that burns when everything else feels dark. So, if you find yourself smiling as you drift towards sleep, remember that it's the same smile they shared, the same sound that echoed in those caves so long ago. Their laughter was our laughter, and it carried them through the dark. But even in a life filled with laughter, there were moments that no humor could soften. Imagine the first time this small band of humans faced death, not the abstract, not the animal hides or bones of prey, but the loss of one of their own. Death had always existed, of course. Accidents happened, predators struck, illness stole, but the first time it touched the heart of the group, it must have felt like the cave itself had gone silent. Picture a winter morning. The air inside the cave is cold enough that every breath turns visible. The fire has burned low, and one elder, wrapped in furs, does not stir. Others wake, stretch, cough, scratch at the chill clinging to their skin. They glance at him, call his name, or what passed for a name, a sound repeated so often it was unmistakably his. He does not answer. A child tugs at his arm, confused, until an adult pulls them back gently. Silence spreads through the group, heavier than smoke. They know, instinctively, what has happened. How do you react when you have no word for death? When you've never rehearsed grief? The first reactions may have been simple. Fear, confusion. They may have watched his stillness, pressed fingers to his lips, searching for breath. And when none came, they sat together, whispering low, trying to explain to themselves what could not be explained. There would have been sorrow. You can hear it in the low moans, the keening wails that rise unbidden, even without words. Grief has its sound. And there would have been touch. Someone placing a hand on the lifeless body, smoothing the fur cloak, closing the eyes. It was both goodbye and disbelief. But humans cannot sit forever in silence. Soon, questions arose. What do we do with him? Leave him here? But the cave is their home. Could they live beside the dead? Bury him outside? But the ground is frozen, hard as stone. Fire was their constant companion. Perhaps it became their answer. And the ritual was born, not from abstract philosophy, but from necessity. The tribe may have decided to weigh the body with stones before the fire consumed it. Why? Perhaps to keep the body in place, to honor it by surrounding it with the strength of the earth. Or perhaps, simply, because they noticed how fire sometimes scattered remains, and they wanted to hold their loved one together. We may never know, but we do know that they did something deliberate. They acted. They ritualized. For the children, it was a moment of bewilderment. They clung to their mothers, watching wide-eyed, trying to understand why the man who once carried them on his shoulders no longer breathed. For the hunters, it was a reminder of their own fragility. For the elders, it was recognition that their time, too, would come. And yet, through it all, there was tenderness. They did not abandon him. They did not treat him as refuse. They gathered together and gave him something more than disposal. They gave him meaning. Part. Imagine the firelight crackling, the stones glowing red, the body wrapped and lowered with care. Smoke rises into the cave, mingling with the breath of the living. They sit together, quiet now, the flames painting their faces in orange. Perhaps one elder hums softly, a tune meant to comfort the others. Perhaps someone places a small tool, a piece of flint, beside the body, an offering, a gesture that says, "Take this with you." When the fire dies down and the stones crackle with heat, the tribe sits in silence, listening to the night. And in that silence, a new bond is forged. They are no longer just a group of people huddling together against the cold. They are a people who remember. They carry with them not just life, but the weight of the ones they've lost. The first death taught them grief. It also taught them love. It carved into their hearts the knowledge that every moment was fragile, every laugh precious, every shared meal fleeting. And so, in the days that followed, though the sadness lingered, so too did something else. The determination to go on. They mourned, they remembered, and then they laughed again. Because even then, they must have known that laughter was the only way forward. The question lingers like smoke after a fire. Why stones? Out of all the possible materials the prehistoric mind could have reached for wood, clay, bone, even a bouquet of nice flowers, if flowers hadn't been inconveniently frozen under a foot of ice, they chose stones. Heavy, cold, unyielding stones. Imagine being a fly on the cave wall during that decision-making process. Someone probably held up a rock and said, with the confidence of someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks, "Yes, this feels right." And everyone else nodded, because sometimes in prehistory, it was easier to agree than to argue. The first theory is symbolic. Stones are the most permanent things in their world. Flesh decays, wood burns, but stone endures. Maybe the tribe felt that by placing stones inside their dead, they were giving them something eternal, something that would last, even as the body returned to ash. It was like tucking away a piece of eternity inside a fragile human shell. "Here, carry this with you," they might have thought, "so that you are never entirely gone." There's something deeply moving about that, even if it also sounds like the prehistoric equivalent of packing a suitcase with bricks. Another possibility is that the stones were practical. Bodies, after all, do strange things in the fire. They shift, they curl, they even pop a little in ways that would have been both unsettling and, let's be honest, a little bit hilarious, if it weren't so tragic. Imagine trying to have a solemn ritual when the person you're honoring keeps rolling halfway out of the flames like an overcooked log. The stones may have been ballast, keeping the body in place, ensuring it burned evenly, staying where it needed to stay. Less symbolic, more, let's prevent any unholy slapstick during this very serious moment. But humans, even early ones, were rarely satisfied with pure practicality. Symbolism and practicality often danced together. Maybe the stones served both purposes at once. They held the body steady in the fire, but they also meant something. Perhaps each stone was chosen carefully. A smooth river rock to symbolize water, a jagged flint to symbolize strength, a chunk of quartz because, let's face it, quartz is just pretty and has always caught the human eye. Maybe they placed the stones as messages, small, silent prayers, sent with the dead into whatever waited beyond. Of course, it's possible the stones were just stones, maybe the first time Someone thought it was a clever idea, and then it became tradition. Humans are creatures of habit. One family stuffs stones, and the neighbors see it and think, well, if that's what they're doing, we should probably do it too. Otherwise, it'll look like we don't care. Fast forward a few generations, and no one remembers why, but they keep stuffing rocks into their dearly departed, because tradition has a way of sticking around long after meaning slips away. Think about all the things we do today: blowing out candles on a birthday cake, shaking hands with strangers, wearing ties. None of it makes much sense, but try skipping it, and people look at you funny. There's also the theory of fear. Stones are heavy. Maybe the tribe thought they would keep the dead from wandering back. It's a grim but fascinating possibility that the stones were a kind of insurance policy against restless spirits. If the body was weighed down, maybe the soul stayed put, or at least thought twice about climbing out of the fire. It's the Stone Age version of locking your front door at night. Maybe they didn't have the concept of ghosts yet, but they certainly understood unease. And nothing makes you uneasy quite like sleeping next to a lifeless body in a cave during a snowstorm. And let's not underestimate prehistoric overthinking. We like to assume our ancestors were simple, straightforward, pragmatic, but they had the same brains we do, just without the distraction of TikTok. Imagine them sitting in silence, staring into the fire, contemplating life and death with the intensity of philosophers. Maybe one elder thought, what if the soul is like smoke and it rises too quickly before it's ready? What if stones can anchor it, give it weight, give it time? Suddenly, everyone else nods, because that explanation makes as much sense as anything in a world where lightning strikes the ground for no reason and giant beasts roam the plains. The truth is, we'll never know. Archaeologists dig up the bones, find the stones, and make their best guesses. But part of the mystery is the beauty. The stones tell us that even then, humans were searching for meaning. They weren't satisfied with letting the body vanish into the flames without ritual. They wanted to do something deliberate, something to say, this person mattered, this life had weight. And what better way to symbolize weight than with actual weight? Stones in the belly, stones in the chest, stones carried along into the fire. Close your eyes and picture it. The hush of the cave, the orange glow of flames, the careful placing of each rock. Maybe there's a hush, maybe a hum, maybe just silence, heavy as the stones themselves. It is both strange and familiar, alien and human. It reminds you that even in the earliest days, grief and creativity walked hand in hand. They didn't just bury their sorrow, they gave it shape, heft, permanence. They made it something they could hold. If stones were the weight, fire was the release. Fire was more than a tool. It was a companion, a protector, and in moments of death, a kind of sacred messenger. It's hard to imagine the power fire must have held for the people of that age. In a world dominated by cold and darkness, fire was the one element that bent to human will. It transformed raw meat into sustenance, softened roots into edible meals, hardened wooden spears into weapons. It gave light when the sun sank, warmth when the frost crept in, and safety against predators lurking in the night. To them, it was more than useful. It was magic. So when death came, it was natural to turn to fire. To entrust the body of a loved one to flames was to give them back to the most powerful force they knew. Fire consumed, yes, but it also transformed. Watching the flames rise, they may have believed they were watching the soul rise too, carried upward with the smoke. And in that way, fire was not destruction, but passage. Imagine the preparation. The fire pit is cleared, the embers stoked. Larger logs are placed carefully, not just tossed in, but arranged like architecture. The body is brought forward, wrapped in skins, weighted with stones. The tribe gathers, hushed, their breath white in the cold, and when the flames catch, there is that unmistakable crackle, that sudden surge of light. The cave walls flicker, shadows dance, and the dead begin their final journey. But it wasn't only about the dead, it was about the living too. Fire brought them together, gave them a space to grieve communally. The ritual was as much for the survivors as for the one who had gone. Sitting shoulder to shoulder, watching the flames, they felt united in their sorrow. Fire was a mirror, showing them their loss, but also a balm, offering them warmth in the moment when they felt most cold. Think, too, about how fire changes things. Flesh to ash, wood to coal, dark to light. For people who lived in a world of constant uncertainty, that transformation must have felt profound. To place a body in the fire was to witness change made visible. The person who had been there, who had walked and laughed and hunted, was gone. But in their place, something else rose, smoke, curling into the night. Embers, glowing like stars on the ground. It was a lesson that nothing ended completely. It only changed form. Of course, fire also had its practical side. In winter, burying was nearly impossible. The ground was iron hard, tools too crude. Fire solved the problem. But even if it began in practicality, it blossomed into meaning. Humans are very good at turning necessity into ritual. We still do it today. We light candles at vigils, bonfires at festivals, fireplaces at Christmas. The spark still calls to something deep inside us, just as it did then. You can imagine the tribe whispering as the flames rose. Some may have cried, others sat in silence, some perhaps stared in awe, their eyes reflecting the firelight. The children might have asked questions in soft voices, and the elders might have given vague but comforting answers. "The fire carries him away," they could have said, pointing to the smoke rising through the cold night air. The fire ritual was continuity. Every time someone died, the fire received them. Every time the tribe gathered, every time stones were placed, flames lit, and silence shared. And every time, grief became just a little more bearable. And later, when the flames had died, when only embers glowed faintly in the pit, the tribe would sit a little closer together. They would feed the smaller fire that still burned for warmth, and they would talk again. Slowly, laughter would return, as it always did. But beneath it all was the memory of the flames, the knowledge that fire had been both tomb and torch, both end and beginning. When you think of them now, you can feel it too, the warmth of the flames, the crackle of wood, the shadows leaping on the cave walls. Fire wasn't just part of their lives, it was part of their souls. And in the rituals of death, it was their bridge to eternity. The cave is quiet now, except for the fire. That familiar sound, the one you've probably heard yourself on a camping trip, or in the faint crackle of a fireplace, is magnified here. The cave holds the sound, gives it echo, and turns it into something alive. Each pop of sap, each hiss of smoke, feels like a word whispered into the dark. To these people, it must have felt like the fire was speaking to them, a language older than any tongue. The crackle begins low, a gentle hum as dry twigs catch and flare. Then comes the sharper snap, as thicker branches surrender to flame. Occasionally, a loud pop bursts out of nowhere, startling a child, making someone laugh nervously, reminding everyone that fire is both friend and unpredictable beast. The rhythm is irregular, but somehow steady like a heartbeat, only made of wood and flame. Imagine the orange light dancing across the walls, every flicker creating shapes that might look like animals or spirits. One moment, the shadow stretches long and thin. The next, it collapses into a squat figure with waving arms. To modern eyes, it's simple, light play. To them, it might have felt like the presence of ancestors. The fire, making the invisible visible for a heartbeat or two. Maybe this is where myths began, not under the sun, but in the flickering half-light, when shadows seem to breathe. Someone hums softly. The sound is low, steady, weaving itself into the music of the fire. A chant begins, not words as we know them, but syllables repeated in rhythm. The hum rises and falls with the crackle, a duet of human and flame. Others join, layering sounds together until the cave is filled with a kind of harmony. It is not music as we know it, but it is something deeper, a sound that is half comfort, half spell, meant to soothe fear and call courage. Above the cave, the night sky stretches wider than anything we know. Without streetlights or neon, the stars blaze. It is almost overwhelming, millions of pinpricks, more than you can count, each one bright enough to cast the faintest shimmer on the snow outside. The tribe steps out sometimes, leaving the fire for a moment to gaze upward. You can imagine their silence, their awe, their sense that the fire they nurtured on earth had cousins burning above, far away. Maybe the sparks leaping into the sky looked like miniature stars, trying to go home. The fire's warmth is a barrier against the cold, but also a rhythm for their minds. They listen, the sound lulling them towards sleep. Children curl against their mothers. Elders lean back against the cave wall. Hunters stretch out sore legs. The flames hiss softly, like breath. The pops are punctuation marks in the story of the night. Someone yawns. The chant grows softer, and slowly, the fire becomes lullaby. It's a sound we know too. The hiss of wood, the rise and fall of flame. There is something universal in it, something that taps into the oldest part of us. You could fall asleep to it now, just as they did then. The warmth against your skin, the crackle telling you, you are safe, at least for tonight. But even with the comfort of fire, grief sits heavy. When someone dies, the cave feels emptier. Their laughter is missing, their voice absent from the hum of conversation. The places they sat are suddenly vacant, their tools left untouched. It doesn't matter if it was 150,000 years ago or yesterday. Grief feels the same. A hollow space where a person used to be. The tribe felt it deeply. They didn't have words like mourning or loss, but they had the ache. You can picture them sitting in silence longer than usual, staring into the flames, each lost in thought. Perhaps someone absent-mindedly touches a tool the deceased once used. Perhaps a child asks, innocently, where did he go? And no one quite knows how to answer. That heavy pause, the one that falls when questions outpace certainty, is the essence of grief. They carried the weight together. One person might hum, another might stroke a child's hair, someone might lay a hand on another's shoulder. Physical touch became their language of comfort. No speeches, no explanations, just presence. A reminder that though one was gone, many remained, and they would hold each other up. And yet, grief had its oddities. Imagine someone trying to keep a solemn face during the ritual, only to sneeze loudly from the smoke, shattering the silence. Laughter bubbles up, not because the loss isn't real, but because humans are wired to find release. Sometimes grief is too heavy to carry, without humor sneaking in, like sunlight through cracks. It has always been this way. grief also stretched across time. They didn't just mourn the person, they mourned the memories of what that person carried. An elder's knowledge of hunting trails, the way a mother sang softly to her child, the jokes told by a friend by the fire. Each death felt bigger than one body. It was the loss of a library, a whole collection of wisdom and laughter gone in a single breath. That weight must have felt unbearable at times. And yet, grief was also binding. It reminded them of love. You don't mourn what never mattered. To grieve was to say, this person meant something. Even in the earliest days, humans turned sorrow into ritual, transformed pain into something that could be shared. The stones, the fire, the chanting, all of it was a way of saying, we feel this together, we remember together, it is the same now. Funerals today are filled with words, music, and flowers, but beneath it all is the same impulse, to not let someone vanish without recognition, to carry the weight together so it doesn't crush us alone. So when you think of them, those people huddled in the firelight, grieving in their own raw, wordless way, remember this: their sorrow is your sorrow. Their weight is the same weight you have carried. Across 150,000 years, the shape of mourning hasn't changed. It is the sound of silence after laughter. It is the touch of a hand saying, I'm still here. It is the reminder that life is fragile, and love is what makes its loss so heavy. And perhaps, as you drift into sleep, you can let that truth soothe you. You are part of an unbroken chain of mourners, each one loving, each one grieving, each one surviving. The weight of grief is heavy, but it is also proof of how deeply we care. And that, too, is eternal. When archaeologists discovered that prehistoric people were stuffing stones into the bodies of the dead before burning them, the obvious question was, why? And while researchers write papers full of sober theories, it's hard not to imagine the tribe gathered in the firelight, looking at a pile of rocks and saying, yes, these will do nicely. Sometimes traditions start with logic. Sometimes they start with somebody being very persuasive about geology. One guess is that the stones were anchors for the soul. If life was as confusing and mysterious as it seemed back then, thunder in the sky, strange lights above, animals that vanished into the grass, death must have been the biggest mystery of all. Maybe they imagined the soul as something flighty, like smoke or sparks, prone to drifting away too soon. A stone tucked into the body might have felt like a way to pin the soul down, at least long enough for it to be guided where it needed to go. Imagine explaining that to a child. We put stones inside so Grandpa doesn't float off like a balloon. It's oddly comforting, if also a little heavy-handed. Another idea is that the stones were symbols of strength. Stones endure. They survive fire, water, time itself. Placing them in the body might have been a way of saying, even though this person is gone, their strength remains. It's like the world's earliest motivational poster, except instead of hanging it on the office wall, you tuck it into your uncle before cremation. Grim, yes, but also deeply human in its desire to make loss feel less like an ending and more like a transformation. And then there's the possibility that the stones were simply meaningful in themselves. Perhaps they were chosen for color, shape, or texture. A smooth river stone, worn soft by water, might have symbolized peace. A sharp piece of flint could have meant resilience, or even readiness for whatever challenges lay in the afterlife. Maybe one particularly pretty quartz pebble was chosen because the deceased had admired it during life. He always liked shiny things. Let's send him off with this. It's not so different from placing flowers in a casket today, except the bouquet weighed 50 pounds. and didn't smell nearly as nice. Of course, there's a less romantic theory too. Maybe it was about preventing accidents. Bodies move strangely in fire, and if your solemn farewell keeps turning into a slapstick routine of limbs flopping out of the flames, the dignity of the moment is somewhat ruined. Stones may have acted as ballast, the prehistoric equivalent of saying, "Stay put, please. This is a serious occasion." And over time, what began as practical problem solving may have acquired layers of meaning. Humans are very good at this. We can take something ordinary, like lighting candles on a cake, and, with enough repetition, turn it into a tradition so sacred that skipping it feels wrong. And maybe that's exactly what happened. Someone had the bright idea, it worked, and suddenly it was no longer just an idea, but the way things were done. By the third or fourth funeral, the stones weren't questioned. They had become symbols, because repetition makes things sacred. If you doubt that, consider how many of us have lucky socks or ritual coffee mugs without being able to explain why. Prehistoric people weren't so different. They just had less caffeine. But humor aside, there's a tenderness in the act. To go to the trouble of finding stones, choosing them, and placing them carefully in the body shows that these people cared deeply about honoring their dead. They didn't just let go. They added weight, literal weight, to the meaning of farewell. Whether it was to hold the soul, to show strength, or to keep things from rolling awkwardly out of the fire, it was deliberate. It was love, expressed in stone. And maybe that's the most powerful symbol of all. Permanence. Because while the body burned and the smoke drifted away, the stones remained. They would outlast the flames, the season, even the tribe itself. And thousands of years later, long after the cave was silent, those stones were still there, waiting to tell their story. Night in the cave came slowly, like a blanket being pulled over the world. The fire dimmed from a lively roar to a steady glow. Shadows lengthened and then melted together, until the only light was the orange flicker on the stone walls and the faint glimmer of stars at the mouth of the cave. The day's noise hunting, scraping hides, children laughing and crying, faded into a softer rhythm. It was time for rest. The bedding was simple, piles of furs, dried grasses, whatever insulation they could gather. They spread them out on the packed earth, sometimes carefully, sometimes in a haphazard heap after a long day. Children nestled closest to their parents. Older siblings curled around them. Elders settled near the warmth of the fire. The hunters often stretched out near the entrance, half protective instinct, half the desire to breathe air that wasn't quite so thick with smoke and snoring. And there was plenty of snoring. Imagine the sound of a half-dozen exhausted adults, their breath rasping in sleep, mixing with the hiss of fire and the occasional drip of water from the cave ceiling. It was a lullaby of sorts if you found snores soothing. That island, some probably grumbled and nudged their neighbors. The prehistoric equivalent of rolling someone over on their side. But soon, even the protests gave way to the steady chorus of rest. Dreams must have come quickly. After a day of cold and hunger, after running across plains or bending over roots, sleep was irresistible. What did they dream of? Maybe the hunts that had gone wrong, retold as triumphs in the imagination. Maybe mammoths falling with a single throw, deer that leapt willingly into their arms. Maybe they dreamed of warmth and food, of endless fires and rivers full of fish. Or maybe they dreamed stranger things, faces in the shadows, voices in the wind, ancestors whispering advice. Dreams were mysteries then, unexplained, but probably shared in the morning with the same bemusement we feel today. I dreamt I was chasing a rabbit, and then the rabbit told me to fix my spear. Cue laughter and teasing. But not everyone fell asleep at once. There were quiet conversations in the dark, murmurs just loud enough to be heard by those lying close. A mother soothing her restless child, humming softly, the tune simple but full of love. Two hunters, whispering about tomorrow's plans, debating which valley to explore. An elder telling a short story to whoever was still awake, his words blending into the rhythm of the fire, until it was hard to tell where voice ended and dream began. Sometimes, silence filled the cave, heavy but not uncomfortable. Just the fire breathing, the wind sighing outside, the occasional shuffle as someone rolled over. In that silence, you could almost hear the thoughts people lying awake, staring into the glow, reflecting on the day, on loss, on hopes for tomorrow. Humans have always had sleepless nights. It's comforting, in a way, to know that even then, someone might have been lying awake, tracing patterns in the smoke, wondering what it all meant. Eventually, the cave settled completely. The fire sank to embers, glowing red like sleepy eyes. The cold pressed in at the edges, but the warmth of bodies, the cocoon of furs, and the steady heartbeat of community kept it at bay. Outside, wolves might howl, the wind might whip snow across the cliffs, but inside the cave was safety, closeness, and rest. And as you imagine them there, drifting deeper into dreams, you can feel the same peace, the knowledge that even in a harsh world, there were nights of comfort, nights when people whispered love, shared warmth, and surrendered to sleep with the sound of fire still in their ears. It's easy to forget how baffling the world must have been for people living 150,000 years ago. You and I, we live surrounded by explanations. Thunder is the collision of air masses. Lightning is static electricity on a cosmic scale. Death is a biological shutdown of cells, organs, systems. We may not always like those explanations, but they're there, pinned down by science, like butterflies in a glass case. But for them, the mysteries remained unsolved. Every flash of lightning, every shadow in the forest, every illness that stole a friend was a question without an answer. And death was the biggest question of all. When someone died, the body looked almost the same as before. The hands were still there, the lines in the face, the hair that had taken years to grow. The difference was silence, no breath, no spark, no movement. How could they not wonder? Where had that person gone? What was different? Why had laughter stopped? Imagine lying in the cave, staring at the lifeless body, trying to wrap your mind around something so familiar, yet so alien. It's the same bewilderment a child feels today when they first learn about death, magnified by the absence of words, of theology, of philosophy. For them, fear of the unknown wasn't an abstract thought. It was visceral. If someone fell sick, no one could explain why. If they healed, no one could explain that either. Maybe spirits had helped, maybe spirits had harmed, or maybe the person had simply been unlucky, touched by something unseen. And so death became not just an end, but a doorway to uncertainty. Did the dead wander in the night? Did they change into animals? Did they linger as invisible watchers? Nobody knew, and in the absence of certainty, imagination filled the gaps. You can almost hear them talking in low voices around the fire, after the children had fallen asleep. Maybe he walks in the sky now. Maybe she became the wind. Maybe he's still here, listening. Their voices soft, hesitant, because even then, they understood that death demanded respect. But inside their minds, The questions ran wild. Where does the warmth go? What is the silence? Will it happen to me? To everyone? And the answer, though unspoken, must have been terrifying. Yes, that fear is universal. We know so much more now, and yet the unknown remains. Our ancestors looked up at the stars and wondered if the dead went there. We look up at the same stars with our telescopes and charts, and we still wonder. They feared the silence. We do too. They told stories to soften the fear. So do we. Religion, philosophy, bedtime stories, even Netflix dramas, all of them are our way of taming the unknown. The difference is that they did it with firelight and whispers instead of streaming subscriptions. Humor must have played its part even then. Picture someone making a nervous joke, trying to cut through the heaviness. Maybe he's gone off hunting without us. Lucky him, no more frostbite. The others laugh, not because it's funny, but because laughter eases fear. It always has. And then the silence returns, heavy, thoughtful, as eyes flick toward the lifeless figure wrapped in skins. Death for them was not just a personal loss, it was a threat. Every absence weakened the group. Each person carried skills, stories, memories. When one died, something irreplaceable vanished. That loss was practical, but it was also spiritual. They must have felt it in their bones, that life was fragile, that everything could change in an instant. And that fear made them cautious, made them inventive, made them ritualize. The unknown was not something to solve, but something to honor. They turned their questions into ceremonies, their fear into firelight, their grief into stones, placed carefully inside the body. Maybe those rituals reassured them that the unknown wasn't so dangerous after all. Maybe, as they watched the flames rise, they believed that the person was safe wherever they had gone. And isn't that the same comfort we seek today? We tell ourselves stories, we write poems, we speak eulogies, we try to explain the unexplainable, not with answers, but with meaning. They did the same, in their cave, long before language could fully capture what they felt. And if you close your eyes, you can feel their fear and their hope stretching across the centuries, still echoing in the silence that follows every final breath. Now imagine the ritual itself, reconstructed from fragments of evidence, pieced together like a puzzle missing half its pieces. Archaeologists find bones, stones, ash, the faint outline of a fire pit. From these clues, they sketch a picture, and while the details may blur, the overall shape emerges. The tribe had a way of saying goodbye, and it involved fire, care, and, of course, stones. The body would be prepared first, wrapped in animal skins, not only to protect it, but perhaps as a final gesture of warmth. These were people who knew the sting of cold in their own flesh. They would not have wanted to send someone into death unclothed. The skins may have been decorated with small carvings or marks, symbols of identity or affection. The tribe would gather around, each adding their touch, a hand smoothing the fur, a whisper, a tear. Then came the stones, not random lumps picked up at the last second, but chosen. Some smooth, some sharp, some with colors that caught the eye in firelight. The stones were placed inside the body, nestled into the chest cavity, tucked between ribs, sometimes in the abdomen. It sounds clinical when described, but in their hands, it was reverent. Each placement deliberate, each stone heavy with intention. Perhaps they whispered as they placed them. Perhaps they stayed silent, their actions speaking what words could not. Once prepared, the body was laid upon a bed of wood. Not just any wood, the driest, most carefully chosen branches, stacked so the fire would catch quickly and burn hot. The stones would help hold the body in place, but they would also heat and glow, their permanence contrasting with the fleeting flesh. The fire was lit, maybe by the elder, maybe by the closest relative. Sparks leapt upward, flames crackled, smoke curled. The tribe gathered close, but not too close, feeling both the warmth and the sting of smoke in their eyes. And then, as the flames grew, the ritual truly began. They may have chanted softly, voices rising and falling in time with the fire. Simple syllables, repeated over and over, the sound more about rhythm than meaning. Children clung to their parents, eyes wide, learning for the first time what it meant to say goodbye. Adults stared into the flames, faces illuminated by orange light, their expressions unreadable but heavy with feeling. The fire did its work. Flesh blackened, curled, fell away. The stones glowed red, sometimes even cracking with the heat, releasing sharp little snaps, like punctuation marks in the silence. The tribe watched, transfixed, perhaps believing that the soul was being carried upward with the smoke, that the stones were escorting it safely. When the fire died down, the ritual wasn't over. The embers smoldered, glowing faintly in the pit. Ash clung to the stones, to the bones that remained. Some of the tribe might have gathered the fragments, placing them carefully in a separate spot, perhaps a small hollow in the cave wall. Others may have left them where they lay, letting time reclaim them. Either way, the fire had done its work, and the ritual was complete. And afterward, they sat together in silence. Maybe someone hummed, maybe someone told a story about the one who was gone. The children, restless now, may have played quietly, stacking smaller stones, mimicking the adults without understanding. The elders leaned close to the fire, staring into the embers, remembering the times when they themselves had said goodbye before. It is humbling to imagine them there, to know that this practice was not random, not careless. It was deliberate, meaningful, repeated enough times that traces remain for us to find. And while we can never know every detail, the broad strokes are clear. The stones, the fire, the gathering of the tribe, a ritual that carried grief, soothed fear, and gave weight to the love they felt. So the next time you hold a stone in your hand, feel its weight, its permanence, its cool surface. Remember that long ago, people like you and me held stones in their hands too, and placed them inside the bodies of those they loved, not because they understood everything, but because they understood enough that death is heavy, and sometimes the only way to carry it is with something as solid and enduring as stone. For people living 150,000 years ago, the fire wasn't just a tool, it was a guardian, a presence that offered comfort in a world that often seemed harsh, unpredictable, and cold. When grief settled into the cave like a heavy shadow, firelight was the thing that softened its edges. Imagine sitting near the flames after losing someone. The sorrow is there, thick in the chest, heavy in the throat. The cave feels emptier than it did before. And yet, the fire doesn't stop burning. It crackles, it glows, it warms the skin. Its light reaches into the darkness, pushing back the parts of the cave where shadows might otherwise feel frightening. For the tribe, the fire wasn't simply a reminder of life, it was life itself. The orange glow wrapped itself around them like a second skin. It made faces visible when the night wanted to swallow them. It made hands steady when they reached for one another in the dark. Even when no one spoke, The fire spoke for them, every snap of wood, every shifting ember, every sigh of smoke. In its presence, grief felt less overwhelming. There is something about staring into flames that has always soothed the human spirit. You've probably felt it yourself. That quiet hypnosis of watching logs collapse, sparks spiral upward, coals smolder with a red that seems both alive and eternal. Our ancestors felt it too. When someone was gone, the fire seemed to say, "I am still here. The world hasn't ended. There is warmth still. There is light still." It was reassurance in a language older than words. And fire was steady. In a life where the wind howled, animals prowled, and weather shifted with cruel suddenness, fire was dependable. If fed, it survived. If tended, it endured. That must have felt miraculous to people who watched so much else vanish without warning. Death could not be stopped, but fire could be kept alive. That alone was a kind of comfort, a reminder that not everything was fleeting. There's also the communal side of fire. It drew people together. When grief threatened to isolate, fire reversed it. No one sat alone in the flames' glow. Shoulders touched, hands found hands, breaths mingled in the smoke. Around the fire, sorrow was shared. One person's tears became part of the group's ritual, absorbed by the larger rhythm of crackle and warmth. It was a space where grief could be held, where silence was allowed, but never loneliness. Humor lived there too, in the gentlest way. Not jokes to make fun of grief, but small chuckles to remind the living that joy still existed. Someone's hair might catch a spark, and the frantic patting would break the tension. Someone would sneeze from the smoke, and even in sadness, a laugh would slip through. The fire gave them permission to laugh and cry in the same breath. It was also a teacher. Watching wood consumed, turned to ash, then to glowing coals, must have seemed like a reflection of life itself. The body burns, but something remains. The smoke rises, the heat lingers. The light continues, even after the log has collapsed. For mourners, this might have been the closest thing to hope, that just as fire transformed wood, maybe death transformed the person they loved into something unseen, but still present. Think of the children in the cave, small bodies curled close to their mothers. For them, the firelight was a blanket of reassurance. They may not have understood loss the way the adults did, but they felt it. And when fear threatened, the fire's warmth calmed them. It said, "You are safe. You are not alone." Even now, the comfort of firelight lingers in us. We light candles for the dead. We gather around fireplaces to share stories. We strike matches in vigils when words fail. The flame still reassures. It still tells us that grief can be softened by warmth, that darkness can be held back by light. The people of the cave knew this instinctively, and it is why they turned to fire not only for food and warmth, but for mourning. So as they sat there, eyes reflecting orange, sorrow heavy but bearable, the fire offered them its steady gift, constancy. Life ended, but the flames went on, and in that glow, they found comfort enough to rise again the next day, to keep living, to keep remembering. Of course, no matter how solemn the ritual, no matter how heavy the grief, humans have always been humans, and humans are masters of awkward moments. You can imagine it. The tribe gathers for the funeral, stones carefully placed, fire prepared, silence hanging thick, and then someone's stomach growls, loudly, so loud it echoes in the cave. Everyone looks over, eyebrows raised, and the poor culprit tries to look serious, but their cheeks flush, And suddenly, the tension cracks. A ripple of laughter passes through the group, half guilty, half relieved. That's the thing about funerals, even ancient ones. They were solemn, yes, but they were also human. Awkwardness was inevitable. Maybe a child toddled too close to the fire, and 3 adults scrambled at once to pull them back, tripping over each other in the process. Maybe someone sneezed mid-chant, turning the rhythmic hum into an accidental honk that sent the younger ones into giggles. Grief didn't erase clumsiness, and clumsiness often brought laughter. It wasn't disrespect, it was survival. Laughter is a pressure valve. When sorrow swells too heavy, the smallest absurdity can release it. A misplaced word, a fumbled movement, a look exchanged across the flames, and suddenly the heaviness lifts, even if only for a moment. The cave fills with chuckles, and for just a heartbeat, the dead are honored, not with silence, but with joy. Imagine one elder, stern and solemn, beginning a chant, his voice deep and rhythmic. He's the spiritual anchor of the ritual, everyone watching him carefully. And then, halfway through, he loses track of the rhythm, stumbles on a sound, and accidentally makes a noise that sounds suspiciously like a goat. The children snort. The hunters cover their mouths. Even the elder himself cracks a smile, shaking his head. The chant resumes, steadier this time, but now with the undertone of suppressed laughter weaving through it. Even the placement of stones could have had its moments. Perhaps one slipped out at the wrong time, tumbling noisily onto the ground, bouncing in a way that ruined the solemnity. Everyone stares at it, then at the poor soul responsible, and suddenly, the cave is filled with muffled laughter again. Humor doesn't wait for the right moment, it barges in uninvited, even at the darkest times. And that may have been the point. These awkward, funny moments were reminders that life went on. The person they lost had once laughed too, had once been clumsy, had once sneezed inappropriately. To laugh at the funeral was to carry that memory forward, to let joy stand alongside grief, rather than be buried beneath it. It also gave the children something they could bear. Funerals are heavy, even today. Imagine being a child in a smoky cave, trying to understand death. The solemnity might have been crushing. But when laughter bubbled up, it gave them permission to breathe again, to feel that sadness didn't erase play, didn't erase lightness. It showed them that grief was part of life, not the end of it. You've probably seen it yourself. In modern funerals, there's always that moment, a story told about the deceased that makes everyone laugh, even through tears. Someone recalls their clumsy dance, their terrible cooking, their unstoppable snoring. The room fills with laughter, and suddenly grief feels lighter. The echoes of joy sit side by side with sorrow, and that balance is healing. The people in the cave found that same balance, even without words to explain it. So yes, their funerals had awkward moments, and thank goodness they did, because without those moments, the weight of grief might have been unbearable. With them, sorrow was softened by laughter, memory carried not only in tears, but in chuckles that bounced off stone walls and rose with the smoke. Even now, as you imagine them, you can almost hear it, the crackle of fire, the solemn hum, and then, in the middle of it all, a burst of laughter echoing in the dark. Proof that even in mourning, life insists on joy. Proof that love doesn't end in silence, but continues in the echoes of laughter left behind. When you look closely at the strange rituals of ancient people, the stones, the fire, the chanting, it's easy to think they were just superstition, just scraps of mystery left behind by people who didn't know any better. But if you stop and really imagine yourself in that cave, sitting beside them, it becomes clear these rituals weren't just for the dead, they were for the living. They were survival strategies every bit as important as sharp flint or warm furs. Because here's the truth. Death could crush a small group. In a tribe of 20 or 30 people, every loss felt like an earthquake. One hunter gone meant fewer chances of meat. One elder gone meant stories lost, knowledge of migration paths or seasons gone with them. One mother gone meant children suddenly, without protection. And emotionally, each death carried weight. It was heavy. If left untended, that grief could fracture the group, weaken their will, make them careless in the face of danger. Ritual was their way of balancing on the edge of despair, of turning sorrow into something that held them together, instead of tearing them apart. Think of what happened when they placed stones inside a body. It wasn't only about symbolism, it was action. It gave hands something to do when hearts were overwhelmed. It turned grief into a process. And humans have always needed process. We don't like to just sit with feelings. We like to make them visible, tangible, shaped by ritual. That's how you keep going when your mind is screaming that the world has ended. The fire did the same. Watching the flames consume the body, listening to the crackle, smelling the smoke, it gave people something outside of themselves to focus on. It created a rhythm. Prepare, place, burn, watch, gather. That rhythm soothed the chaos of grief. It said, here is the way. This is what we do. And when you know what to do, even in sorrow, you feel less helpless. The rituals also gave permission to cry, to wail, to sit in silence. When everyone came together, no one had to pretend to be strong. They could feel what they felt, because the ritual provided a container, and once the fire died down, the container closed, and the group could slowly step back into life. Without that, grief might have stretched endlessly, infecting every moment. With ritual, it had shape. Humor had its role too. Awkward, as it sometimes was. A sneeze, a stumble, a misthrown stone. These little cracks of comedy, in the middle of the ritual, reminded the tribe that life was still here, still messy, still ridiculous. Imagine a hunter solemnly chanting, only to trip over a log. At first, a gasp, then someone giggles, then everyone is laughing, even through tears, and afterward, the sadness doesn't feel so impossible to bear. Humor didn't erase grief, but it helped them breathe again. The children learned from these rituals as well. By watching how adults treated the dead, they learned that life had meaning, that loss was acknowledged, that community was stronger than sorrow. They grew up knowing that when sadness came, there was a way through it, not alone, not in silence, but together, by firelight, with stones in hand and chants on their lips. That knowledge may have been as important to their survival as any hunting skill. It made them resilient, and perhaps the most profound lesson the rituals carried was this: even when death takes one of us, life continues. For the rest, the fire still burns, the stones still remain, the group still gathers, still eats, still laughs. The rituals said, yes, death is heavy, but you are not alone in carrying it. And in a world as brutal as theirs, that reminder was priceless. So when you picture them around the fire, chanting, crying, even laughing, don't see it as primitive confusion. See it as genius. They invented a way to survive grief. They made rituals that were emotional medicine, binding their small, fragile communities together when loss threatened to scatter them. And in that way, those rituals weren't just for the dead. They were lessons for the living. Lessons we still follow, even if we don't always realize it. If you walk into a modern funeral, you might see flowers arranged in perfect arcs, hear soft music playing from hidden speakers, smell incense or perfume in the air. It feels worlds away from a smoky cave filled with furs, stones, and chanting. And yet, beneath the details, the thread is the same. What they did then, we still do now. Think about the gathering itself. People still come together when someone dies. Family, friends, neighbors, they sit in rows, shoulder to shoulder, just as the tribe huddled around the fire. No one wants to mourn alone. The presence of others softens the blow. The ancient people knew it instinctively, and we know it too. We still bring offerings. Instead of stones, we place flowers or candles. Instead of wrapping the body in furs, we wrap it in fine clothes or blankets. It's the same impulse, to send the dead away with something tangible, something that says, we cared, we remember. It doesn't matter if it's quartz tucked into a rib cage or lilies laid across a coffin. The meaning is the same. We still light fire, maybe not a bonfire in a cave, but candles on an altar, flames in lanterns, incense, sticks, glowing in the dark. Flame remains our universal symbol of life, of transformation, of memory. Watch a candle at a vigil, its small flame trembling against the night, and you are watching the same message the tribe saw in their fire pit. Life goes, but light endures. We still tell stories. Around modern funerals, someone always stands to speak. They recall the person's quirks, their triumphs, their flaws. There's laughter, sometimes loud, as memories spill out. The echoes of humor that once bounced off cave walls now ring through chapels and funeral homes. The details are different, less about mammoth hunts, more about embarrassing karaoke performances, but the role is the same. Stories turn grief into memory. They keep the dead alive in a way that silence cannot. And we still use ritual as a container. In modern grief, we wear black, or we bring casseroles. We gather at certain times. We speak certain words. We follow certain steps. The exact customs differ across cultures. Some bury, some cremate, some sing, some wail. But the impulse is identical. Ritual tells us what to do when we don't know what to do. It gives shape to chaos, makes grief bearable, and reminds us that we are not the first, nor the last, to feel this weight. The echoes go further still. Even the awkwardness remains. Just as a sneeze once disrupted a chant, today, a ringtone might pierce the silence of a eulogy. Everyone stiffens, then chuckles, then breathes again. Laughter sneaks in, reminding us that grief and humor have always shared the same fire. So what do we carry today? We carry the stones, though they've changed shape. We carry the fire, though it flickers in candles instead of bonfires. We carry the gathering, the stories, the laughter, the tears. We carry the lesson that loss is survivable if it is shared. When you sit at a modern funeral, listening to voices rise in song or story, watching hands reach for each other in comfort, you are sitting in the same circle as your ancestors. The clothes are different, the setting is different, but the essence is unchanged. Ritual is the bridge across time, built from grief and love. And maybe that's the greatest comfort of all. When we mourn today, we are not alone, not only because others are in the room, but because countless generations are behind us, mourning in caves, by fires, with stones in hand. We are part of a long, unbroken chain of humans who refused to let death silence love. That is what we carry. That is what we always will. 150,000 years. Say the number slowly, and it sounds like a wall of time, so vast it feels impossible to cross. And yet here we are, crossing it, every time we tell their story. Every fire that burned in a cave, every laugh that echoed off stone walls, every tear shed over a body wrapped in furs, it all drifts down through time until it rests quietly in us. Time stretches, folds, and suddenly the past is not so far away. Think of it like this. If you could line up every human who ever lived from that moment until now, shoulder to shoulder, you'd have a line longer than continents. And yet, in that line, you could walk from them to us in just a few steps. A child from that cave grew into an adult, had children of their own, who had children, and so on, passing on, not just genes, but habits, instincts, rituals. And eventually, after enough steps, after enough nights of firelight and enough mornings of hunting, one of those children became your ancestor. The distance is immense, but the connection is immediate. We imagine time as something far away, as if prehistory belongs in a museum case, sealed behind glass. But really, time is like the firelight on the cave wall, always moving, always flickering, sometimes stretching into strange shapes, but always connected to the flame at its center. You are that flame now, the living continuation of something that began so long ago. The drift of centuries hasn't erased the spark. It has carried it. It's strange to think that in their world, 150,000 years ago, nothing like your world existed. No cities, no books, no morning alarms that make you question all your life choices. Just the raw earth, endless sky, cold winds, and the sound of fire. And yet, if one of them sat here now, they would recognize the important things. They'd see you gathered with others and know you were family. They'd hear you laugh and know you were human. They'd watch you grieve and understand completely, because grief hasn't changed in all that time. Time compresses when you look closely. One person's lifetime overlaps with another's, and then another's, until what seems like a vast distance is actually just a chain of overlapping days. Imagine laying a quilt, square upon square of lived lives, stitched together until the pattern stretches across millennia. Each patch is a generation, and you are simply the newest square added to the edge. The quilt looks enormous when you step back, but each square is just the size of a human life, soft and small and warm. There's also the humor of it. Think of all the things that seemed urgent to them: catching that one rabbit, sharpening that one spear, keeping that one fire going. And think of all the things that seem urgent to you: replying to that one email, charging that one phone, making it through that one Monday morning. Different details, same drama. The continuity is funny and humbling. In another 150,000 years, if humanity still lingers, people will probably laugh at our seriousness too. They thought Wi-Fi passwords mattered. Adorable. But here's the comfort. The drift of time doesn't erase us. It transforms us. Those caves are silent now, their fires long gone, but their warmth is still here. In the rituals we keep, in the laughter that bubbles even at funerals, in the way we lean on each other when grief is too heavy. They left no books, no films, no grand monuments, but they left us. That is their masterpiece. So as you imagine that long drift of time, don't see it as distance. See it as a river, carrying stories, carrying love, carrying firelight. You are sitting at its shore tonight, listening to its quiet rush. And as you drift into sleep, remember, you are part of a story, so long, it stretches beyond imagination, and so close, it can be felt in the beat of your heart. The fire has burned low now. The stones, once heavy in ritual, are quiet and cool. The tribe is asleep, curled in furs, their breaths weaving together into a steady chorus. Outside, the stars still burn, their light traveling across gulfs of time to reach the mouth of the cave. Inside, there is peace. And you, here, centuries later, are also by a fire of sorts. Not the crackling of branches, but the glow of memory, the warmth of story. You've walked with them tonight through their laughter, their grief, their rituals. You've sat beside their flames, felt the weight of their stones, and heard the echo of their voices in the dark. And now it is time to rest, as they did. Close your eyes. Imagine the cave around you, its walls sheltering you from the cold. The fire hums quietly, a lullaby of sparks. A child shifts in their sleep beside you, murmuring nonsense words. Someone snores, soft and steady, like a drumbeat of reassurance. The world outside may be vast and frightening, but here, in this glow, you are safe, you are held. And as you drift deeper, let yourself smile at the absurdity that even funerals had awkward moments, that someone surely sneezed into the solemn silence and others laughed through their tears. Let that thought tuck you in like a blanket, that even at the edge of despair, humans have always found ways to chuckle. Grief and laughter, hand in hand, like the shadows and the firelight. Sleep now, with their memory close. Sleep with the comfort of knowing you are part of them, that their fire still burns in you, that the story of 150,000 years is stitched into your very bones. Sleep with the humor that even in the darkest cave, someone probably tripped over their own feet, and the whole tribe had to pause their mourning to laugh. The fire fades, the stars drift, the night deepens. Let your breathing slow with theirs. Let your dreams carry you across the long drift of time, back into warmth, back into laughter, back into peace. And that's where we'll leave the fire burning low for tonight. Sleep well, dream deeply, and know you're part of a story much older than the stars above. If your eyes are still open and you're not quite ready to drift off, you can click one of the 2 videos on your screen now and keep the journey going. And if you'd like more nights of ancient stories, soft laughter, and gentle rituals to fall asleep to, make sure to subscribe. It keeps the fire alive here, and it means you'll always have a place to rest. Good night.